Red Bull's F1 driver situation has already hit its first crisis point in 2025 after Liam Lawson's disastrous first 2 races with the team leave him facing the axe already. Lawson was promoted to the top team with just 11 races to his name after Red Bull decided to bin Sergio Perez and felt it couldn't trust Yuki Tsunoda to replace him. Lawson always faced a tough task alongside Max Verstappen, but Red Bull insisted it would take that into account and give him time and support, while backing his robust mentality and flashes of potential to help him do the job the team needed. So how's it come to this? 2 Grand Prix into Lawson's Red Bull career and suggestions that he must improve immediately in the next race in Japan to keep his seat, or may even get dumped before then. The answer is a complicated mix of Red Bull mismanagement, car weaknesses and Lawson's own struggles. But the upshot is simple: Lawson's Red Bull future is in jeopardy already. Lawson qualified 18th in Australia and crashed out there while trying to hang on slicks when the rain returned, qualified 19th for the sprint in China and finished 14th, and qualified 20th for the Grand Prix itself before finishing a limp 15th. He hasn't even started a Grand Prix from the grid yet for Red Bull, as qualifying's gone so badly, Red Bull's broken parc fermé to make car changes and he started from the pit lane both times. In China, that really didn't work, with Christian Horner describing it as a radically different setup in pursuit of some answers about the RB21, not just Lawson. This form is so far below expectations that Red Bull chiefs are already understood to be privately questioning whether Lawson can improve quickly enough to support Verstappen to the required level. Lawson has faced a challenging set of circumstances, with testing compromised by a reliability problem on his full day in the car, then the season starting in Australia and China, 2 circuits he hadn't competed at before. However, he knows Suzuka from his Super Formula campaign in 2023 and his AlphaTauri race there in F1 that season when he finished 11th, so the excuse of being a circuit novice will not stand up. That means the next race in Japan could be a key test, assuming Lawson even lasts that long. Because while Red Bull bosses are putting a brave-ish face on the situation in public, as John Noble explains, they are not ruling out drastic short-term action.
Christian Horner was open tonight that Red Bull will make a decision about its driver lineup after this weekend's Chinese Grand Prix. Liam Lawson's had a very difficult start to the season, qualifying 20th and last here in both qualifyings at the Chinese Grand Prix, had a difficult Australia, and the team now needs to work out if he's in a situation that is untenable. There could be a situation where even for Japan they decide to swap drivers around. They've got Yuki Tsunoda, they have Isaac Hadjar as their options, or it could be that they decide to give Lawson another chance, see what he can do in Japan, then make a decision that if things aren't improving, make a call from then. Christian Horner was pushed quite a lot, would not guarantee anything going forwards, but said that they'll go away from here, take all the data, analyse everything, and then make a call about what happens for Suzuka.
In Australia, Lawson was optimistic that there was a combination of things holding him back in qualifying. But in China, Lawson sounded a lot more like a driver for whom the reality of getting this Red Bull to work has really dawned on him. The weekend seemed like a constant, futile battle to improve, and perhaps Lawson has been more caught out by the RB21, which doesn't seem to be much of an improvement on its predecessor. Red Bull even has Verstappen openly suggesting that the second team's car is faster based on the job Yuki Tsunoda and Isaac Hadjar are doing for Racing Bulls and how Lawson looked in that team last year. That's pretty embarrassing for a technical team which seems to have failed to rectify the car trickiness that Verstappen loathed last year, that Perez struggled so much with, and that Lawson is now being badly exposed to. There are other mitigating circumstances. Lawson is inexperienced in F1, Shanghai can be a very punishing track for newcomers, and it was a sprint weekend, putting a premium on rapid adaptation and not allowing for iterative improvements. The problem for Lawson is that Hadjar made a bit of a mockery of the caveats that apply, seeing as the Racing Bulls rookie qualified 7th ahead of Tsunoda. To be fair to Lawson, he's not actually making any excuses. He acknowledges that while time would be great, it's a luxury he doesn't have. That's not specifically a Red Bull reference, it's a reflection of the reality of F1. This is hard, this car is even harder, and finding something as intangible as feeling and confidence is an inexact science, especially when weekends go by so quickly. Correcting the situation will not be easy. For all the praise Red Bull had previously heaped on Lawson for his mental robustness, his attitude, and the promise seen in his bit part F1 seasons to date, he was already behind the curve coming into the season and is now desperately playing catch up while on the job. And he's struggling with a situation he admits he's obviously not enjoying. The only consolation right now is the lack of performance is so obvious, and where Lawson is losing out is so easy to see that theoretically there are huge chunks of lap time to gain by having a better feeling, being more confident and being more precise. Whether he can tap into that and how he can do it is the great unknown. Whether it's something that can change just by going to a more familiar track, or there's something in the car to bring it closer to what Lawson needs at the cost of a bit of outright performance, or just in Lawson himself doing a better job of not getting thrown by what's in his hands. Only a few months ago, Red Bull was convinced that Lawson's potential was the highest of its options. What might buy Lawson some time now is Red Bull doesn't have what it considers a stunning alternative, and the lack of options is why Lawson got the drive in the first place. But there could soon be pressure from below, as Tsunoda has started the season brightly and Hadjar was rapid in China. The headline conclusions from Lawson's first weekends are that he's driving too conservatively in some places and too imprecisely in others. He lacked pace all weekend in China, struggling to piece it together over one lap and then getting nowhere in race stints. All three Q1 runs in qualifying were compromised by misjudgments at different points of the lap, but a mistake-ridden second run seemed to sap Lawson of all confidence. And a deconstruction of his final qualifying lap shows how much Lawson's trailing across the board and why the end result was as pronounced as it was. He was extremely cautious into the first corner, probably a consequence of the previous snaps, and after slowing the car too much on entry was coming off and on the brakes in unusual fashion, trying to correct how much speed he was rolling through the corner with. At its worst, that yielded a surprise 30 km/h speed difference in the first phase of the corner and cost him a quarter of a second to Verstappen immediately. This was repeated to a less pronounced degree in turn 3, where Lawson was much more cautious on entry. That was the cause of repeated struggles in China, with Lawson struggling to get the car rotated, and another tenth was lost overall here. The next major loss came when Lawson ran too wide out of turn 9 onto the exit curb, which pulled him offline through turn 10 and delayed him getting on the throttle, which meant he came off the corner a lot slower and cost another couple of tenths to Verstappen. A similar amount of time was lost through the complex and down the back straight, as Lawson's cautious entry and slower run out was carried all the way down to the hairpin, where a tiny bit of understeer after going in too hot cost another tenth. Unfortunately, it didn't get any better in race trim. A combative sprint was even dismissed by Lawson as no silver lining, given he only finished 14th in a Red Bull and the Grand Prix was awful. Lawson made no progress early on beyond clearing the two embattled Saubers, and the rest of his race was a hiding to nothing. He couldn't even beat Gabriel Bortoletto's fastest lap after emerging from the pits on fresh tyres, and spent the race in no man's land on his way to 15th. The only saving grace was that he just about avoided being lapped. Lawson's struggles don't just reflect poorly on him though, he's in this position because of Red Bull's own failings. For Red Bull to need to turn to a driver with 11 starts to partner Verstappen was already concerning. For it to be lamenting that decision after Lawson's second weekend suggests the intention to do right by its new driver is already beginning to creak. It was always a risk putting in an inexperienced, decent driver who hadn't stunned Red Bull on the junior ladder. Lawson was just the lesser of two evils as far as Christian Horner was concerned, because there was division of whether Tsunoda was up to the job, even though he was clearly the most sensible candidate given his experience and results. Red Bull's driver mismanagement goes back the better part of a decade now, and while we'd need a whole video to plot the full story of its mistakes, even a quickfire summary reflects badly. Red Bull rushed Pierre Gasly into the seat Daniel Ricciardo walked away from for 2019, then opted not to stand by Gasly when he had a tricky first half of the season and dumped him during the summer break. In came Alex Albon, who Red Bull had actually dropped years earlier but re-signed to drive for Toro Rosso because it had run out of juniors. Albon lasted 1.5 years, was considered too far adrift of Verstappen as well, so Red Bull gave up on its own drivers and signed Perez. He was a stopgap solution that somehow ended up being Red Bull's play for 4 seasons and would have been for 2 more without the protracted negotiations to pay him off at the end of 2024. And this is all without getting into signings like Nick de Vries and the ill-fated return of Ricciardo. It has been a mess, one that Red Bull has only ever made worse, much less started to untangle. With Verstappen being a unicorn driver and the team consciously or not being pulled into developing the car around his particular sensitivities, being his teammate is probably the impossible F1 job. Lawson struggling so much so early to do that job says as much if not more about Red Bull as it does Lawson himself. But he knows he's in an environment where a deficit this large is unsustainable. In his words, he's here to perform, and if he's not doing that, he won't last. And ultimately, if this doesn't work, it's Lawson who will pay the price, not the decision makers.